take us back to that first meeting with Michelle Obama. I know you had this 30 minutes, I guess it was in effect an audition to become the director of her documentary. Can you just tell me about that experience, what that was like?
Sure. So, I initially get this call with this idea that, some folks that work with Mrs. Obama, especially Priya Swaminathan, who runs High Ground Productions, which is the Obama's production company, she says, Mrs. Obama's getting ready to go on this book tour, and we're sort of floating the idea of documenting it. We don't know yet if it will be a film or if the footage will just live within her archive, but we think it's something that should be filmed and someone should be there. So of course, there were many layers that had to happen before I was the person that was put in front of Mrs. Obama. So a few weeks after that initial call, I got an email that said, you have an appointment at the office of Michelle and Barack Obama. And I was like, oh my God, this is happening. This is scary. It's kind of like the idea of the, I think thinking about something possibly happening and then knowing it's going to happen, and the weight of that is just this moment where that so much hinges on this one meeting. So it was very it was a lot for me to take in. And the first thing I thought, well, what's the best way that I can prepare for something like this? And immediately I thought, well, I need to go back and revisit all her speeches. So I went on YouTube and I watched as many of her speeches as I could find. And then I read all the magazine features that she had done over the years. And then after I got through that, I was like, okay, what else? And so I went back and read both of the president's books. And so much of the Obama's own lives, not only before the president was elected, but prior to that, was steeped in this idea of storytelling and the importance of us, especially as people of color, passing down our stories, sharing our stories, and how deeply embedded in the culture that was. And so I thought to myself, I also have committed my life to storytelling as a documentary filmmaker. It's something that it's like my tool to express myself in the world, to hopefully change the world. And so I was like, we have this thing in common. That's the one thing I thought. I said, we have this basic thing in common. Our lives have been fundamentally changed by storytelling. And so when I went into that room with Mrs. Obama, I knew that was a point of conversation that we could have, that we, immediately, this is the thing we have in common. And so I get to her office and, I walk into her room, and it's like kind of this dreamlike space. It's beautifully and softly lit. And there's all this African-American artwork on the wall. And, she's gorgeous. So she's sitting in the far corner. She stands up to come and greet me. And, she's tall. And it just, for a moment, I was like, is this a dream? Am I just having this like very elaborate dream? Or, my mind kind of like shifted between reality and not. It just really felt like something out of a dream. And so I had to very quickly snap out and be like, you are not dreaming. You need to focus and do the thing you came here to do. And so, she gave me a huge hug, and she's just so warm and friendly. And we sat down and we had a wonderful conversation. And, we talked about our neighborhoods and where we grew up, how it shaped who we are, our moms. And then, then we talked about some ideas for making a movie. And, storytelling was the idea of storytelling, not just Mrs. Obama's biopic and telling her life, but thinking that she was going to embark on this unprecedented worldwide book tour that no one's ever done before. I was very curious in exploring the act of storytelling within the documentary, and she really connected with that idea.
You've spoken a bit about the weight of it all, and I know during the documentary there's a discussion that Michelle Obama has with some young students, And at one point during the discussion, one of the students says, "Why me?" as to why was she chosen to be a part of this meeting. And I wondered, obviously, you're an experienced filmmaker, but because this is such a, huge, I guess, Michelle Obama's personality and her influence and impact is huge, but then also the what impact this documentary could have as well. Was there any point where you thought, why me? And if not, why do you think that wasn't a concern for you? But if it was at first, how did you overcome that?
I absolutely had moments where I was like, why me? And then sometimes it was like, why me? Like, this is so hard. I think so much of society shapes who we are. And I think as people of color, and I can speak for the American experience, but what I really love about this film, I have to say, is that because it's on this international platform, I have gotten a chance to talk to people like you, journalists all around the world, who have a such a different experience in some ways, and then the same experience as people of color have in America. And I think the differences and the similarities are so interesting. And I also think that from an international perspective, one thing that I appreciate is that people have told me that this film has helped them understand America in some ways more, which was not necessarily my intention, but I'm so happy that it's something that has come out of it. But back to your question, sorry, I went off for a little bit. So my experience, the way I experienced life in America was often that I was incapable of achieving great things, perhaps, or that, I wasn't deserving of a nice place to live or a good education, being that I come from the South Bronx, which is a very poor community in the United States, majority people of color. Those were the sort of messages that were given to me my whole life. And that becomes part of your soul and your DNA and who you are. And even as an adult and someone who has achieved a level of success, you never forget those things because they're so part of your fabric. So when I got this job, and as I set out to create this film, there were definitely moments where all those old things that, were embedded in me since childhood about my worth, my value, my ability, my intellect, all just kind of came at me in a way that made me question oftentimes, why was I chosen to do this? There are people that are smarter than me. There are people that are better than me. There are people that are more experienced than me. They went to a better school than I went to. They should have gotten this job. Why did I get this job? And am I capable of doing this? And so that was a question that, up until the very end of making this film, was a constant in my mind.
I think a lot of people will relate to that. And especially, I think, young people who are maybe interested in getting into this industry. And I wondered if you had any advice for young filmmakers. How can they overcome, I guess, that are similar to some of the things that are explored in the documentary, separate themselves from, I guess, those statistics and the perception of them that's put on them by other people?
Sure. So I think when I look back and try to answer that question, why did I have the experience that I had that led me to where I am? And knowing that I sit in groups with lots of people like me in this industry who are having similar experiences, whether they're extraordinary or awful that make you want to quit and do something else. What I can look back and think that I did, and a lot of it was for survival. It wasn't even because I had this grand plan. But when I encountered people that were uplifting to me, that were willing to nurture me, be kind, and create a space where I could learn. And even if I did something wrong, I was told I did it wrong, but it wasn't the end of the world. And it was done with sort of this loving, nurturing and teaching. I gravitated to those people and kept them very, very close to me. When I had encounters that were the opposite of that, where it was clear to me that people did not want me around, that they didn't think I had any value, that I couldn't bring anything to the table, or they judged me because of the way I look or where I come from, I did everything in my power to not engage with those types of folks. So I really kind of built this wall around me where I said, even if it wasn't always financially the best idea, or, you know, the most gainful in that way, it was psychologically the thing that I needed to push through all the barriers that come with working in entertainment or in the film industry. And that really helped me get to where I am right now.
And this documentary has given you access to some intimate spaces, conversations with Michelle Obama and her family. What were some of the things that you learned from spending so much time with her and her family? Was there anything that particularly struck you that you didn't know before entering this experience?
Sure. So spending time with Mrs. Obama and her mom and her brother Craig especially was some of the most fun times that I had working on this film. They're a regular family, and I think we see that in some of the scenes. For example, when Craig is teasing his little sister about the belt that she's wearing, and you can just see how Mrs. Obama is, the authenticity that she has. In a lot of people ask me, is she really the way we imagine? And I'm like, yes, she is. And you could see that in her interactions with her brother and her mom. And that's really how she stays grounded in a lot of ways. Her mom ribs her and gives her a hard time, and she's never like, my daughter Michelle Obama is the most perfect person in the world. That's not the feeling that you get. And it was extraordinary and wonderful, and I think it was so revealing of her character outside of the way we see her interact potentially with like strangers and things like that. But it was really fun.
Was it a challenge to, I guess, find things that were fresh to present in this documentary, which is something I think that you did achieve, but I just wondered how challenging that was, considering people already have an idea, whether it's good or bad, about the Obamas, and there is so much on them out there.
For sure. That's a great question too. I think for me, my goal was, especially Mrs. Obama's book is thorough. Like, if you really read that book, and I read it a few times making this film, there's always new information that emerges every time I read it. It is a very thorough telling of who she is. But I do think that something that is exciting about cinema is that storytelling resonates in a different way than it does through text and even through still photographs. So one thing that we did learn in making this film was there's not a whole lot of footage of Mrs. Obama, even in archive, that is personal, that has been released into the world. We have seen her in speeches or on stage or things like that, but we hadn't actually been exposed to things like that. So I said, how do I take the magic of cinema and what a camera can do and use that to tell her story in a different way, and also in a way that would resonate with people. So the first thing my documentary experience told me was, you have to get close to her, like physically close. My lens has to be, you have to feel intimate, So I do think anytime you saw her from, giving a speech, those camera lenses are far, or even if they're on a long lens, they feel far. So for me, I just wanted to be physically close to her. I wanted the audience to have the experience that I had, what it feels like to ride with Michelle Obama in her motorcade car, or, be with her in these smaller spaces where you could actually, just see the way she makes eye contact with someone, the way her body language and how she touches people. To me, those were the things that cinema could do that a book maybe didn't do or couldn't do, or that, a magazine article or archive couldn't necessarily do. I think it's sort of that physical body language that kind of lives in between the moments that said so much about her that hadn't been said or seen before.
Some documentary makers will ask questions on camera and we hear the audio, but that was something that you decided against in your film. I wondered if that was a tool that you used to create more intimacy.
I was really conscious of this being a story from Michelle Obama's perspective. I was just there to help usher the, the technical and sort of the other elements of filmmaking that I brought to it. But I didn't want anything like my voice to be a disruption in that experience that the audience had of really feeling like they are seeing through her eyes, they're thinking in her mind and moving through the world having this experience of her. And I didn't want my, if I inserted myself to sort of like crack that sort of that zone that people get into when you really believe, like breaking that wall, essentially, I guess they say in film, right? Like that fourth wall of, oh yeah, there's a camera here, there's a person here. It's like I wanted people to feel like I am the person behind the camera. I am the one having this experience.
Can you talk about some of the challenges that you faced, I guess in terms of creativity, like control, and also I guess just like logistics? So we know that even outside of the White House, the Obamas are, heavily protected with security. Can you talk about, I guess, both sides of that, the creative challenges, but also logistical challenges?
So I think, the creative challenges were mainly in the edit room in terms of, the film aspires to do more than one thing. It aspires to tell the story of Mrs. Obama's life, tell the story of her in this moment, this present moment, 2 years after the White House, in a very reflective state of mind, where she's like, whoa, what just happened to me? Like, this is wild. I'm just a girl from the south side of Chicago. This little girl that grew up in this very normal family. No one expected her to be the first Black First Lady of the United States. She never expected that to happen. She kind of always just wanted a normal life. So she was kind of like in the state of reflection. And then also the film aspires to tell the stories of other people that she connects with along the way. So that in itself poses a very difficult creative challenge because doing more than one thing in a film is hard. I guess is the only word for it. It's a hard thing to do. And so it took a very brilliant edit team that I worked with, a creative team, for us to all put our brains together and figure out how to crack the code to do this as seamlessly as possible in a way that still moved Mrs. Obama's story forward, but also was able to include other stories, whether it was, Shayla, who's the young woman that, is like, how do I not just become a stat? And also has her home life is almost like a mirror of what you imagine a young Michelle Robinson life might have been like in the south side of Chicago. To her Secret Service agent, or Melissa Winters, who is, her chief of staff and sort of like her partner in doing all this and making all this happen. So that was an incredible creative challenge to weave those stories in and out. No one was exactly the right time to introduce these ideas and also be able to propel the story forward. So I think we spent sleepless nights, early mornings, pots of coffee, scene cards up on the board, and we tried so many different variations before we felt like we nailed it. So that was probably the hardest part. In terms of logistics, after I had that first meeting with Mrs. Obama and I got the job on the spot, within a couple of weeks we hit the ground running, and I was out there with her, and on tour, and with the group of people she travels with, that she works with, they've all been together for 12 years, 10 years, so they have this rhythm that is second nature to everyone. And I was the new kid on the block that I was like, wait, what's happening? What car do I get into? How does this work? And everyone was so welcoming and friendly to me that they would literally just grab me and be like, here you go, like go that way. Or, the Secret Service, who they work, they're very serious. Their job is to keep Mrs. Obama safe. She moves very quickly. There's no time. You don't hang out and stand on the corner if you're Mrs. Obama. You move, you get in a car, you get to the place you're going. And for me, I see all this movement and this choreography happening, and I was like, how do I fit into this? How do I get close to her without disrupting this very specific type of flow that is happening? And so, I did my best to observe it and jump in as quickly as I could. But, everyone on her team really worked hard to make sure that I was not tripping over stuff as we were walking. And, and the Secret Service were a really great part of that. And so but it was at the beginning, I think I was just like, how do I tackle this thing? How do I take on this thing and become a part of it when I've never been a part of it before, so you got to kind of like fit into this very well-oiled machine without messing up the flow of it. Yeah.
Something you mentioned earlier was still photographs, and I know that that's something you incorporated throughout the documentary. Is something that we see in Michelle Obama's memoir, Becoming. Can you tell me about using this as a tool in storytelling?
I'll start with the more contemporary images of Mrs. Obama. So, like I said, there wasn't a tremendous amount of archive of her that we had access to. So, in terms of video footage. And so, but she had been photographed quite a bit. And so I love photography. I think it's such a beautiful medium, and it's what we had to work with. And so we had tens of thousands of photographs that were taken of her over the 2 terms in the White House that, we had a team of people that went through, and we organized them. And, every time we had an idea of something we wanted to say in the film, we would dig into these photographs and find images that represented a part of her life or something, whether it was like girls' education or things like that we knew were things that she worked on in the White House. So that's how we took on the still photographs, and they were a huge resource to us in our storytelling. And then, a little bit, I would say about midway in making the film, we knew that we wanted to tell her backstory as a child. And it's very common that, you see that in documentaries where people have childhood photos or photos of, themselves younger. And so this was actually really awesome. So we got this photo album where you see her and her family looking at it, but then we learned that Mrs. Robinson, her mom, had more photos at home in Chicago. So I go to visit Mrs. Robinson at her home in Chicago, and she just takes out these amazing books of photographs that were so incredibly special, not only because they had photos of a young Michelle Robinson, but there were photos of distant cousins and aunts and uncles and the neighbor. And it was really this world of Black South Side Chicago during this very specific period of time that, to me, visually, I was able to imagine this incredible world that Michelle Obama grew up in. And like she says, so much of who she is happened in those years younger, not the 8 years in the White House. And so it was like being able to create this world and saying, of course she became who she is. Look at this, look at her grandmother, her great grandmother, and look at her great aunt, and look at their friends from church, and look at this beautiful baby shower and this wedding. And you could just really feel the texture of this community that she came from. And so that was one of my favorite parts of working on this film, actually. It just felt like a treasure was given to me. And unfortunately, in a documentary that's runs 90 minutes, you can only leave a certain amount of time for something like that. But if it was up to me, I would have spent like an hour showing the audience some of these old photographs because they were just absolutely beautiful. And they just said so much. Each image had its own story.
In the documentary, you interview Michelle Obama, as well as obviously some of the other people that she's surrounded with, some of her family members. But can you tell me about how you approached that section of making the documentary, that interview with her?
Sure. So I had wanted to wait till the latest date possible to do a sit down interview with Mrs. Obama, mainly because I was getting to know her. And you have a different relationship with someone when you first meet them versus spending day after day with each other for 6 months. So we really developed a relationship over a period of time where I think by the time we sat across from each other in an interview chair, our rapport was so developed that the answers that she gave me in that at that moment in time was different than it would have been the first week that we met. So that was one of the strategies. The other thing was just figuring what the film was going to be about, and having her speak to those things. But also, one, my background is a verite filmmaker, so it's really filming things as they're happening, watching them unfold. So I really wanted to lean into the verite with this film more than with sit down interviews, because it's this type of film that you can do so many sit down interviews and it could be that could be the film. But I really wanted to lean into the verite moments in the film as much as possible. And then the idea of the sit down interview was, what are some things that we weren't able to say in the verite that are important to the storytelling that we need Mrs. Obama to address in an interview? So that was the strategy of how the sit down interview was approached.
Okay, and I just have one last question, which is Michelle Obama's response to this. What was it like when she saw the film finally, when it was finished?
I mean, it was extraordinary. She was so thrilled with the finished product, the film. I think she was very moved by seeing how people reacted to her show. Because when you're on the stage and there's 15,000 people, you don't get to see each person's face, for example. And something that I spent some time doing was filming people very intimately in the audiences. So I think there was just so many emotions that she had from seeing some of the archival of her life story to the present day and seeing people reacting to her in the audience, as well as the stories of the young women. I think it was just a really emotional experience for her. So it worked out well in the end.